this video, I'm going to walk you through the exact ACT hacking system that I used to improve my score from a 31 up to a perfect 36, and how my students are now using this exact same system to improve their scores by 5 points or more. So I created this ACT hacking system through a ton of my own trial and error and a ton of wasted time, a ton of mistakes. And now I've been working with other students to efficiently implement this system to get crazy outcomes on the ACT. So if you're looking to efficiently increase your score on the ACT and use that score to get into top colleges and earn a ton of money in scholarships, then you're in the right place. Whether you're like Ava, who was a great high school student but really struggled on standardized tests and started out with a 22 on the ACT before implementing this ACT hacking system and ending up at a 30.
So in high school, I was like a straight A student. I had a 4.0, and I never really did well on standardized testing, which was unfortunate because when I took the ACT, I got a 22. So overall, my score improved from a 22 to a 30, which is amazing. And this allowed me to get into my dream school, and I also got a great scholarship.
Or if you're more like Skylar, who had a little bit of test anxiety and had to overcome that in order to take her score from a 27 up to a 35.
I definitely deal with some like test anxiety, so the only thing that to combat that is knowing I'm prepared. First time I took the test, I got a 27. So super score ended up being a 35. In reading, I had a 36. English was a 35. Science was a 34, and math was a 33.
This video is going to show you exactly what you need to do so that when you walk into the testing center on test day, you can read the first half of a question and already kind of know what the second half of that question is going to ask, and you're going to know exactly what you need to do to solve that question in the most efficient way possible. So right here, I'm showing you all the secrets to this system, and it's going to sound like I'm exaggerating here, but this could literally change the trajectory of your entire life, just like it did for me when I took my score from a 31 to a 36, and just like it did for Ava and Skylar and countless other students. So this is going to be a bit of a long video, but if you're not willing to sit down and spend 20 or 30 minutes, or if you watched on 2x speed, 10 or 15 minutes, if you're not willing to do that, then honestly, you're probably not cut out for success here on the ACT anyways. Okay, so why am I making this video here, and why am I giving away all the secrets to this ACT hacking system? Well, it's because I was not always able to score these perfect 36s myself on the ACT. I wasn't always able to get letters from the CEO of the ACT company saying like, congratulations on your outstanding performance, congrats on the perfect 36. When I was preparing for the ACT myself back in the day, I made a ton of mistakes and I wasted hundreds of hours of my own time seeing just absolutely no score improvement. So now I try and put out information that would have saved high school Carson from making some of those big mistakes, and would have saved high school Carson from wasting a bunch of his own time. So I do have a program where I coach students individually, but I can't coach everybody one-on-one. So I'm just making this video to help out the students that I cannot coach individually. And so going back to the start here, we kind of have to start with my own ACT journey. Let's start out back when I was this overconfident high school student who ended up getting a little bit humbled on the ACT. So the first time I took the test, I was super confident. I had, perfect grades in high school, was taking AP classes and doing really well. But the first time I took the test, I got stumped pretty thoroughly on pretty much all 4 sections of the test. And I ended up with a 31 there, which, pretty decent score, not bad. But what I was trying to do was get into an Ivy League school or an equivalent like Ivy Plus type of school, get into all of the elite schools, and also earn the most money possible in scholarships. So I wanted to do better than that, and I knew I should be able to do better than that because my high school grades told me that I should be in that 34, 35, 36 range. So what I did is, fortunately, I was willing to work pretty hard, but that's where, I ended up wasting a lot of my time because I was willing to work so hard. So I made what I see as a very common mistake here is, the prep booklet mistake. What I did is I went out, I bought the ACT prep booklet, and I took a bunch of these practice tests. And what I would do is I would take a practice test. If I was really committed to it, I would review some of the solutions to the questions that I missed. And then I would just roll on to the next practice test. And I would take another one and, maybe review the solutions to the questions that I missed there. And then, roll on, take another practice test. That's what I had heard was going to improve my score. Just take all the practice tests and your score will just magically go up. But I noticed, from practice test to practice test to practice test, my score was actually not going up. Despite all the work I was putting in, despite all the reviewing, even when I spent more time reviewing the solutions guide, my score was still in that 30, 31, 32 range. And so what I did, I kept just continued taking these practice tests, praying that, magically my score would just go up and I would get better at these tests when I wasn't really doing anything to actually make my score go up. Albert Einstein, definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So I was the definition of an insane person back at that time. I was making the same mistakes over and over again, not actually finding a way to improve them. But then eventually I did have an epiphany, and like a lot of my lessons from back in the day, it came from the sport of baseball. So I was a baseball player and learned a lot from on the field and off the field stuff back then. And I've actually told the story before of how Gary Sheffield made an impact on my ACT journey. That's a story for another time. This one is actually a lesson that I learned from one of my good high school coaches back in the day. And this came from when I was running our high school baseball camp. So our high school baseball team would put on baseball camps during the summer for like younger kids, 8 to 12 years old, who needed something to do during the summer. So they joined our baseball camp. And, as one of the players on the team, and what I did on the first day of the camp, I had never worked with anybody else on baseball before. Like, I'd worked with coaches to learn from them, but I had never actually tried to teach baseball to anybody else, especially these younger, like 8 to 12-year-old kids. So what I did, we were working with the infielders. I was rolling and hitting them ground balls to have them go through the fielding process of, fielding a ground ball, throwing it to first base, all that stuff. But obviously these were younger kids. They had a lot of problems with their mechanics, and, the practice, the camp looked pretty ugly. We were making a lot of errors all over the place. Balls rolling past us kicking ground balls all over the place, throwing baseballs all over, just a lot of errors, and it was overall pretty ugly. And so what I did is I was trying to fix their mistakes. And again, I had no experience working with students or working with kids on baseball before. I had only been taught things. I had never actually tried to teach somebody else myself. So I was trying to give them tips on everything that they should improve all at the same time. How to get your feet ready, how to approach a ground ball, get the ball in your glove, transition over to, getting ready to throw, and then also like making a good throw across the infield. So I even got up and I showed them exactly how to do it. I had them roll me ground balls, and I was showing them, get your feet here. This is how you transition to throwing. This is how you make a good throw. But nothing was sticking with these kids. I was continuing to hit them ground balls, and they were continuing to just make no improvements whatsoever. So that's when my Coach Frank came over, and he, basically flipped my perspective on what learning actually is. He was like, what are you doing? Like, how are you expecting these kids to actually learn when you're making a couple big mistakes here? First off, you are spreading them too thin, or you're trying to work on every single aspect of the fielding process all at the same time. Footwork, fielding position, get the ball in the glove, throwing, all of that stuff. How are you supposed to make improvements when you're working on everything, or you're trying to work on everything all at the same time? And the second mistake you're making is you're just spoon feeding them the correct way of doing it. You're telling them exactly what they need to do, and you're even showing them, and just expecting that they're going to absorb the right way of doing it by having them watch you go through the correct motions. So you cannot just tell them exactly what to do and then have them expect to do it. So two big mistakes there. So what we did instead is what a good, baseball coach will have you do, which is work on not just spreading ourselves thin across everything, but work on one aspect of fielding at a time. And you create drills to improve your process in that one aspect at a time. So what we did first, Coach Frank said, everything follows the feet. The feet are your highest priority. So we worked on a footwork drill. We brought out cones, and had the kids like put their gloves to the side. They took their gloves off. We're only working on footwork. And we had cones guiding them to the correct position, but then they were getting in the correct ready position with their feet by themselves. They were following the cones as guide points, but it was still them going through the process of learning it on their own. And then after we got their footwork in a good spot, we actually had them kneel down, get their gloves back on, kneel down so that their footwork was no longer something that we were thinking about. And then we had them, practice getting the ball into their glove, the actual fielding motion. And then once we got better at that, then we worked on the transition from fielding to throwing, and then the actual throwing. But we did this all, individually. And I stopped spoon feeding them the correct answer, and more so gave them guide points to what they should be doing, but then had them practice it on their own. And then after a couple hours of just doing drills, then we came back and we started putting all of these little individual pieces together with, hitting them and rolling them ground balls, where they would go through the full process from start to finish of, getting in the ready position, fielding the ground ball, and throwing it to first base. And that's when they actually made the improvements. They put all of this stuff together, and by the end of the day, the practice actually looked, significantly better. There were a lot fewer errors, a lot fewer balls rolling all over the field compared to where we were at the beginning of the day. And so this was my epiphany on the ACT as well. I was doing literally both of these exact same things. I was spreading myself super thin. I was trying to cover all 4 sections of the test all at once by taking full-length practice tests. And then I was just spoon feeding myself the correct answers from the solutions manual. I wasn't actually, able to make that improvement on my own. And obviously, when I take the practice test or I take the real ACT, I'm not going to have the solutions manual there to tell me the correct answers. So that's why I was not making any improvement. And so what I realized from this is that there are only so many ways that the ACT can ask the same types of questions. So I started focusing in first on the math section because that was my weakest point. But then within the math section, I started working, even narrower than that, specifically on long word problems, because I saw that those were a type of question that showed up again and again, and I was struggling with. And specifically, even long word problems that were asking about more abstract concepts. So I narrowed it in as narrow as possible, and I created drills for myself on those abstract long word problem types of questions. And what I did is I gave myself, a limited amount of time to go through and try and read and understand that question. I gave myself 45 seconds, sometimes 30 seconds to answer a bunch of those questions. And, I was only working on those abstract long word problems. I was not, trying to do long word problems on the math section and also geometry problems and also algebra problems and also work on the science section at the same time. And when I really focused in on just those types of questions, that's when I actually saw myself making improvement on those types of questions. And once I mastered abstract long word problems, I moved on to other word problems, and then I moved on to coordinate plane geometry questions and so on and so forth, one by one, until I actually made that improvement on all math questions. Then I put it together with practice tests and practiced, all of those things coming together. And then, I went to the other sections of the test and did the exact same thing, one type of question at a time. And then once I mastered all 4 sections, then I would practice with, full length practice tests. And that's when I was, like the campers were doing at the end of the day, kind of putting all of those individual skills together into, one complete package. And that is when I actually made like real improvement on the ACT and, ended up with my perfect 36. And, by the time I got into the testing center, I knew exactly what I was doing. I was not, surprised when any question came up. I was not, confused on how to approach any of those questions. And, when the scores came back a few weeks later and I opened up the results online and I logged into the portal, I was literally not surprised at all when I saw that perfect 36 because I knew, like I was just so prepared. There was no confusion in my mind at all on any of the questions on the test. And so I ended up getting that perfect 36, and along with it, got all the perks that came along with perfect 36. So I got into a couple different top 5 schools. I got into MIT and the University of Chicago. If you can see that little small piece of paper on the wall behind me, that is U Chicago degree. I ended up getting, almost $500,000 in scholarships. I ended up actually, leveraging that to help my baseball career as well. Ended up getting some Division I baseball offers that I had literally no business getting at all because some of the coaches needed to, bring up their average ACT score or their average GPA of their team. And they were able to give me some offers from the admissions office, from the academic side of scholarship dollars, which means that they could save, and they were able to save some of their, precious athletic scholarships for kids who were probably a lot better at baseball than I was. But ended up getting some offers that I shouldn't have gotten, and even got some bragging rights for scoring higher than my brother at the time. And then later down the line, one other perk that I didn't even, think was going to come through, but I ended up getting my investment banking job partially because of that 36 ACT. My hiring manager later on kind of told me that, one of the things that made my resume stand out was having that 36 at the top of it. So your ACT score can even help you out in ways that you don't think, especially if you're applying for some, prestigious level jobs and competitive jobs down the line. And so it was actually when I was working in that investment banking job out of college that my sister ended up enrolling in, a big name generic ACT prep class. So I saw her going through the process of preparing for the ACT, and in my super limited time outside of that investment banking job, I kind of saw a lot of her struggles with this process because she was actually making a lot of the same mistakes in this prep class. One, having, practice tests just repetitively thrown at her, and then, having the solutions spoon fed to her and spreading herself super thin. So in the prep class, they would just, take a practice test, and then the instructor would go through and spoon feed the solutions to each of the students. So it was the same thing like when I was looking at my solutions manual to my prep guide, I was, spoon feeding myself the solutions. The only difference was my sister was having the solutions spoon fed to her by an instructor in this class with like, 75 or 100 other students. So I got deja vu of myself making these mistakes, wasting a bunch of my time. So what I did is in my super limited time outside of investment banking, took my sister and kind of laid out the same process that I used to create drills for myself. I created some drills for her to improve her score. And she ended up, following those drills pretty thoroughly and taking her score from a 27 up to a 33. And that actually unlocked a lot more benefits for her than it did for me. She actually got into, I think, 4 different Ivy League schools. It was Dartmouth, Penn, Princeton, and Cornell. And then she actually ended up attending her top choice of Notre Dame over all of those Ivy League schools. But she got a lot of benefits from it. And what happened is, some of her friends saw her go from that 27 up to a 33. And they started asking, hey, like, what did you do for this? And she just, pointed them over to me. And that's kind of how I got out of the investment banking world and into the world of helping students hack the ACT in order to consistently improve their scores by 4, 5, and sometimes even a lot more points than that. And so now this is what I've been doing for the past few years. A little bit more fulfilling than that investment banking job, earning a bunch of scholarship dollars from these 4 to 5 points. There was actually a study done by Granite Education a few years back, and they found that each extra point on the ACT is worth about $8,400. I think it was $8,451 in extra scholarship dollars for 1 extra point on the ACT. And that was a number of years ago before inflation and all that stuff. I would say nowadays this is probably worth more like $10,000 or more than that conservatively for each extra ACT point that you get. So these 4 or 5 extra points on the ACT can a lot of times be $40,000 or $50,000 in terms of the scholarships. And so now let's look at why we need ACT hacking. So ACT hacking is kind of this exact process that I went through and took my sister through, and I just distilled it down into a more kind of simplified formula over the past couple of years. And we need ACT hacking because, as we know, most ACT preparation sucks. So we don't want our ACT prep to suck, but most ACT prep, you go through a haphazard preparation process. You take maybe 1 step forward if you're lucky in one area of the test, and while you're taking that step forward, you're taking 1 or sometimes even 2 steps backwards in a different section of the test. Pretty much every prep process goes through repetitive practice tests without the actual process of learning. You get spoon-fed the answers from either the solutions manual or some sort of instructor. You have general studying without prioritizing the most important topics for your specific situation. There's no guarantee that your instructor or the solutions manual or whatever resources you have are going to actually get you to where you need to go. And a lot of times this results in the process dragging on for months and months at a time, sometimes even over a year long, where you're just continuously trying to get this ACT score up. And overall, it just leaves you feeling frustrated, wasting your time, your money, and your effort. And everybody is just left wanting a simple outline for consistently improving their ACT scores. And so that's why I've distilled this into the ACT hacking system. And this ACT hacking system is, again, the exact system that I use when I coach students one-on-one. It starts off with identifying all of your strengths and weaknesses. You lay out a schedule for approaching the high priority question types for you, so you know exactly what to study and when to study it. Then you learn how to recognize and solve a question type most efficiently using drills, and you reinforce that learning, and you prove that you have the ability to solve that question type on your own without guidance, without just being spoon-fed that correct answer. And because you're doing this efficiently, a lot of times I've said in the past 5 to 15 hours per week. I think that 15 hours is even kind of on the super high end. If you really want to go all in and get this thing done pretty quickly, you can invest closer to that 15 hours per week. But what I typically find is the sweet spot now is like 5 to 10 hours per week. If you can go about 1 hour per day, then that's, I think, the sweet spot here, because you're being more efficient than the old way of doing things. And this results in just, steady and consistent incremental improvement on the test until you get to that test day. And I guess the final result is that you have a defined timeline with a goal to put the test away, take the ACT, and then never have to think about it ever again. Not just a process that drags on for months and months and months, and even years on end. And of course, this is the goal when I work with students individually in my coaching program. So shameless plug, if you want to apply to join my personal coaching program and have me take you through this system on a one-on-one basis, then go ahead, check out the description below. There will be some information on how you can apply or set up a call with me to see if it's a good fit. Now we can get into, the next part of this, which is this stuff actually works. So you might be thinking like, okay, great, Carson, you did it for you did it for your sister. How does this actually work in other situations? And, we have some examples here. Ava. Ava was a great high school student, kind of similar situation to what a lot of students out there have. She was great in high school, but she struggled with standardized tests. She started out with a 22 on the ACT, and she did not think that she was going to be able to make any good improvement here. She thought that standardized tests just weren't for her, but she was trying to treat this thing like a normal high school test. And she didn't realize that, there were just a couple question types that we had to work on and work on those very narrowly and in a very focused way. And so after just 6 weeks of working with me one-on-one on this ACT hacking system, she ended up taking that score from a 22 up to a 30. And she was, of course, on the higher end of that. She was probably closer to 15 hours per week in terms of what she was investing. But that's because she needed to do this in just 6 weeks. So it was a pretty tight timeline for her. And as a result, she ended up getting almost $90,000 in scholarships to SMU. So definitely worked for her. Morgan over here was taking a generic SAT prep class, similar to what my sister was doing, except for the SAT. She decided that the SAT wasn't for her and generic prep classes weren't for her. And we came up with a process for her to get familiar with the test, understand the types of questions, and she ended up taking her score from a 26 up to a 32. And then Reese here was a great high school student. Started out with a 30, so he was, a little bit closer to where I was at the start, and I loved working with him as well. Same exact process, it works for all types of students, and he took his score from a 30 up to a final score of a 35. And, we've got tons and tons of these stories. Adia with her perfect 36. Ariel taking her score from a 25 up to a 31. Katya taking her score from a 28 up to a 34. So on and so forth. We've got tons and tons of these. But what you're more interested in probably is, how does this ACT hacking system actually work? And, I say that there are 3 different parts to how we want to break this up. Step 1, we find our highest priority question types for our situation. Step 2, we learn how to solve those question types. We learn how to recognize them and then solve them in the most efficient way possible. And then step 3, we ingrain that process so that it becomes second nature to us on test day. And that's where we can really, read the first half of a question and already know what the second half is going to ask us and already have a plan in place for how we're going to approach that. So what this actually looks like for you is, first off, you want to start off with a real ACT diagnostic test, not an ACT that you take, in the official testing center that you have to sign up for, because most of the time you don't get your answers back to that and you have to pay fees and all that stuff. What you want to do is just get a real ACT that they've used in the past and use that as a diagnostic. And you use that to identify your high priority types of questions to work on first. And for example, this might not actually just be the questions that are the toughest on the test. If they don't show up that often, then they might be a lower priority item. For example, on the math section, a lot of students aren't really familiar with the ellipse questions that are super tough, but those only show up like 10 or 20% of the time. So depending on your specific situation, that might even be like a medium or lower priority item to work on. If you've got some other types of questions that maybe you're a little bit more familiar with, but that you're still missing a decent number of, and that show up a lot more frequently. So again, you want to see what your specific high priority question types are. And from there, you use both of these things to determine a schedule for yourself to approach the test. Typically, you want to approach the test for somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks leading up to one test. And ideally, you want to do this over the course of 2 tests so that you can use a super scoring approach. But I've got other videos on that as well, kind of going more in detail there. But you want to create a good schedule for yourself based off of these high priority types of questions. And then you go in and you approach one question type at a time. So you'd start off with, our one highest priority type of question. You determine whether or not you're missing that question because of a lack of content versus a misunderstanding of the right strategy to approach that type of question. This content might look like, just not knowing how to solve for the area of a triangle. And that would just be, okay, we need to learn the formula. And so, if we determine that it's a content deficiency, then we fix that content knowledge by learning the area of a triangle. And we have drills that, you can just use to remember that area of a triangle formula. Now, if it's something like strategy, like just consistently missing, like I was with those abstract math questions that were long word problems, that would be kind of a strategy miss. And then what you would want to do is create yourself an ideal strategy, again, by, using drills and using, practice questions where you're specifically focused on those types of questions to come up with a better way to approach those types of questions. And then you would want to practice that again with similar types of questions. You'd want to make sure that you're actually learning that process the correct way, without somebody spoon feeding you the correct answer, or without your solutions guide, telling you exactly what you need to do. And so, you might start off by like using some notes to help you out on these types of questions, but then you would also want to have, the ability to solve these questions without your notes, without your tutor, without your coach, without the videos that you're watching, all of that stuff. And that is how you know that you've actually gone through the true process of learning with a question type. And then basically you just rinse and repeat this process with all of the high priority types of questions that you have to work on. And this is now when we're in this ingraining process. We've ingrained the habits over and over again, and now we're gonna put them all together with, practice individual sections. Once we've done all of the question types for math, you'd want to take, practice math sections, and you put all 4 sections together with practice full length exams. And that's when, the true full process of learning is fully ingrained once you can do this across, all 4 sections of the test with full length practice tests. And then obviously this ends up with us getting to that dream ACT score, getting the college admissions that you want, getting, all the scholarships that you could possibly get. And so now you're probably thinking like, okay, great. I've got the roadmap. What are the next steps for me? Well, what you can do is go out and implement this exactly on your own. Take your diagnostic test, find the highest priority areas, do all of this stuff, and end up getting your perfect score or getting your dream score at the very least. Or what you can do is kind of what some of these other students have done, which is taken the quick shortcut through this process, knowing that they might make a mistake or it might take them a lot longer to go through this process if they do it on their own. And what you can do is, check out the information in the description below this video and, apply to see if we're a good fit to work together in my coaching program, just like all these students did. We've got Naomi over here taking her score from an 18 to a 24 after she joined the program, Sheridan 24 up to 30. All of these students down here as well. Personally love getting these texts down here when on the day that scores come out. Robert, getting a full ride scholarship after not even thinking that he was going to be able to attend college because the cost was too high. Took his score from a 21 to a 29. Nick ending up with getting a 31 after starting out with a 24. And, if we zoom in here, this is a 31.25, might be a little bit too blurry to even see, but all he needs is one more point on one section of the test, and he's going to be retaking it. So I'm assuming he'll end up with a 32 or maybe even a 33 or even higher than that. We've got Skylar, who worked with me. She only spent 1 hour a week for the course of 7 weeks. And, we've got her original score of a 27, transitioning this over to a 35 after the course of, taking 2 tests and using a super scoring approach. So again, another great outcome there. What these students all had in common is that they wanted to shortcut the process and make sure that they were able to properly, go through this ACT hacking system. And that's why they reached out to work with me. So if you want to actually take action and, remove all doubt that you're doing this properly, then go ahead and check out the description below this video. It will have all the information down there on how you can apply to join my coaching program. And, first off, we'll hop on a call to see if we're a good fit to work together. And if so, then, we'll lay out a plan for us to move forward. But if you want to just take this information and run with it, then you can keep using the free resources that I'm putting out. Like I said, I put out this information because I know that students like myself back in the day would have loved this information. So stay tuned to the channel here on YouTube. Also follow me over on Instagram. I put out a lot of good stuff over there, and hopefully I'll see you soon.